Welcome to the Grow and Go podcast, where we discuss feeding under fives in the early education setting. Your hosts today are Claire and myself, Stella. We're accredited practicing dietitians with a special interest in feeding kids under 5. This podcast is being recorded on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. We pay our respects to traditional custodians and their elders past and present. Today we'll be talking about all things fussy eating. We'll discuss what it is, why it happens, and how to support the children and families in your centre experiencing it. So firstly, let's understand why some kids are picky eaters. Knowing that some pickiness is normal for children aged 2 to 5 years is important. This is because at this stage they're going through a developmental phase where their growth slows down and they become more independent. They learn to assert themselves, and yes, they can be pretty stubborn. They may refuse foods they used to like or want to only eat the same foods repeatedly. They may also be sensitive to certain foods' taste, texture, smell, or appearance. Here are the golden rules. Never resort to bribes, threats, or punishments to make them eat. Mealtimes must remain an enjoyable experience for them. Coercion and coaxing only makes things worse. They can make a child more resistant to eating or cause them to overeat or undereat. They can also damage a child's trusted relationship with you and food. So we might go into a little bit more detail about something called division of responsibility. So Claire, would you mind giving us a bit of a rundown about what the division of responsibility is?
So your role as the food provider is divided into 3 elements, which is the when, where, and what. So you get to decide when food is provided. So that needs to happen on a regular, predictable schedule. Now, this is already likely to be in place at your centre, and you will provide children with regular meals and snacks throughout the day. And this structure is helpful. It will help children develop a healthy appetite and identify their hunger cues. In terms of the what, this is where you are deciding what food's going to be offered. Now, for education setting, state-based guidelines are available on food provision, and that will help you guide your menu planning. And that will include a variety of nutritious foods from different food groups. Introduce any new foods gradually and repeatedly, but without any pressure or expectation. And the where is about the mealtime environment. We need to create an environment that signals this is the time that we eat. It would be best if you had a designated place for eating, that there are minimised or minimal distractions around the child, and that the child is sitting comfortably and safely in a high chair, booster seat, or other child-appropriate seating, ideally with some sort of foot support. On the other side of this division of responsibility, children have their own duties, and they get to decide if they'll eat what's on offer and how much of it they will eat. It is not your job to force feed them. You need to trust the child's ability to regulate their own intake and appetite. And if they don't eat much in one meal, don't panic. Over a day, things will usually balance out.
So, would you be able to give, I guess, some practical advice on or some strategies for helping fussy eaters?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a few things you can do before a meal to try and help the child transition from sort of those playtime or other learning activities they've been doing into the meal time. We want to engage them in big fun movements. So you could play a game, have them go outside and play on the play equipment, burn off a bit of energy basically, get all their wiggles out and get ready to then come in and eat. It's a good idea to give children about a 10-minute warning or so before the meal, helping them understand that this is going to be a change in activity soon and it's going to be we're going to go eat. You could use things like ringing a dinner bell, washing hands, or helping set up the room or the mealtime environment to help establish that transition period. If the child is still really full of energy during the meal, it can be good to have a few ideas around calming activities that can be used to sort of try and bring the energy level down. So this might be things like getting them to blow bubbles, which is great for activating deep breathing, getting them to draw what the meal is going to be, playing I Spy or some sort of other game together at the table. It's also helpful for some kids to make meals look a little less overwhelming by offering a deconstructed version of it. So where possible, if you can pull apart the elements of the meal and offer them separately, that can help take some of that overwhelm away. Or you could offer finger foods, but just with a small amount of different foods that the children can then help themselves to. So the idea of having sort of almost that buffet style approach where kids can load up their own plate can be really helpful. If the child can't sit still, it can be good to have a wiggle break. This could be simple as a quick dash around the room, a visit to the toilet, a little dance, whatever it is that you think the child will enjoy that just gives them an opportunity to get up and move. It's also important that you monitor what kind of foods and drinks the child's already consumed before the meal, just to make sure that they're not filling up on anything, or to acknowledge that maybe later in the day they might not be as hungry. Have a realistic time limit for meals as well. After sort of 20 minutes or so, the child's probably had enough opportunities to eat, and now you can let them move on to other activities and remove anything that hasn't been eaten. It's important to consider extreme cases of fussy eating, and this might be where a child is only eating a few select foods, avoiding certain textures or tastes completely, or is then filling up on milk or formula instead of having solid foods. Unfortunately, these children will require health professional input and support, and it's unlikely that these extreme cases will respond to the standard approaches for fussy eating. And really, it's a sign that educators need to have a conversation with the family. If you're wanting to help families find a health professional to support them, our Find a Health Professional tool is designed to navigate the local healthcare system and identify who and where they might be able to access help. You can find a link to the tool in our show notes, or you can access the tool directly by visiting the Grow and Go website.
So let's talk a little bit more about how we can introduce new foods to kids. So when we have a new food, how can we give it to a child in a way that is going to set us up for the most success?
So there's a few things to think about when you're introducing a new food to a picky eater. First of all, think about when you're providing that new food. It's probably best to introduce it earlier in the day when the children are more alert and interested in eating, rather than later in the day where they might be getting a little bit too tired and it may be overwhelming to try a new food. It's always a good idea to offer something new alongside something familiar to the child. So, for example, if you know that the child enjoys pasta, you might provide that pasta with a new sauce or vegetable, for example, just to try it out with something familiar. It's also, where possible, helpful to make things look appealing and fun, so you can use different shapes, colours and presentation methods to make food more interactive and interesting. So, for example, cutting fruit and vegetables into certain shapes can be really helpful. Introducing a new food is going to be challenging for some kiddies, and they may be reluctant or refuse to try something they're not familiar with, and that's perfectly normal, and it is part of the learning process. So you may find that you're having to offer a new food multiple times before they accept it, and this is normal, and it's important that you persevere through that point. Usually you're going to find at least a few things on your menu that a fussy eater will enjoy. These might be the simple things of sort of bread, pasta or rice. However, if you have one that's very selective and you're struggling, having that conversation with the parents and the family about what foods they enjoy at home that are available in your centre could be the option. Where possible, it's also helpful to involve children in preparing and choosing new foods, letting them help you wash, peel or chop vegetables and fruits that maybe they haven't tried before. If you have a garden at your centre, having the kids involved in picking things from the garden that they might be able to then use in a meal can also be helpful. Of course, we should always praise a child when they try a new food, even if they don't like it at first. Just saying something about, well done for trying something new, I'm proud of you for giving that a taste. It's okay if they don't like things. And it may be that there are just certain foods that children dislike, and we really shouldn't pressure or force children to eat things that they don't enjoy. You can encourage them to do other things and explore foods in a different way. So they might prefer to just touch, smell, maybe lick or taste if they feel like it. But that's okay. It's still learning about the foods. It allows them to find out about the foods in a more sensory way before they actually eat them. Modelling the behaviours you want children to follow is really important. So making sure that educators role model by sitting with the children at meal times, having a conversation while they're eating, showing them the correct use of cutlery and crockery, and generally just showing that this mealtime is a positive experience is a really helpful process. There's a concept in psychology called social facilitation, and this is where the presence and actions of other people can change a behaviour. And we often see this in children where they become more adventurous when they're eating with their peers compared to when they're eating with their families at home. And our childcare centres provide a really great opportunity for fussy eaters to see other children and adults eating foods that perhaps normally at home they might not be exposed to or they might not want to eat. This isn't a quick fix, but used consistently, it does set up opportunities for children who are being a bit more selective or fussy with foods to be a little bit more adventurous. Another approach can be to use food activities that don't require children to eat the food, but rather are more about exploring and playing with food. This provides a low-pressure environment for the child to interact with foods that maybe they're not familiar with or comfortable eating, and hopefully they'll become more comfortable and eventually be happy to try them. We've developed several resources that centres and families can use. There is a sensory placemat, activity cards, and a food passport, all of which you can find for free on the Grow and Go Toolbox website. These form part of what's called sensory exploration, which aims to desensitise children by gradually exposing them to different sensory elements of food like smell, texture and colour. Over time, this repeat exposure can reduce a child's dislike of a food. This approach also feeds into a child's natural curiosity and fosters autonomy. It allows them to explore the food without the expectation of what they must do with the food, i.e. we don't expect them to necessarily eat it. All of this can help reduce anxiety when the food is then presented to the child as part of a meal that they should eat. We do recognise that sensory exploration can be messy and can lead to some food wastage, but in children who are particularly sensitive, it's a step towards a child being able to eat independently and accept a wider variety of tastes and textures. As an alternative, you could consider using plastic or wooden play foods instead of real foods to help reduce some of that food waste.
Yeah, that's really some great tips. And I think the one about introducing foods, I guess, earlier in the day is really great because I think we're often tempted to introduce foods at the dinner meal because that's when maybe as adults we're having new foods or trying a new recipe. However, kids are pretty over it by that time of the day, I find. So yeah, introducing it at lunchtime or dinner or breakfast time is a really good tip. So now sometimes with fussiness, we also see, I guess, some unwanted behaviours come about when kids are presented with new foods or just, around meal times in general. And, we know that all behaviour is communication. So how should we respond to unwanted behaviours at meal times?
That's a great question. And I'm sure many of the educators listening have seen a child act out or misbehave during meal times for a variety of reasons. And this can be really frustrating and stressful for you, and it's disruptive to the other children as well. So having a way of handling that is really important. I would recommend, as best you can, reacting calmly and clearly say what you expect the child to do. So if the child is, for example, throwing food, saying to them, food stays on the plate or in your mouth. If they're standing on a chair, chairs are not for standing on, they're for sitting on. So they're taking food off of another child. No, that's Sam's food. You can eat the food on your plate. Just trying to keep it calm and clear as to what you're expecting the child to actually do. It's also really important that all the educators are on the same page, everyone's giving the same instructions, and the consequences for the unwanted behaviours are the same as well. And that's going to help the child learn what is acceptable and what is not. It's also really important that when the child follows your instructions, that you then praise them. That good behaviour needs to be reinforced. So if they're stopping following the food and they start to eat nicely and sit at the meal properly, thank you, Johnny, for eating so well. You're doing a great job. All those sorts of things. But it's also important to provide some clear logical consequences for any unsafe actions. So, for example, if you've got older children and they're using cutlery and one of the children is doing something questionable and shouldn't be, something that's potentially unsafe, you can clearly state to them what the problem is. If you can't be safe with your knife and fork, then I'm going to have to take it away to keep you safe. And of course, if the child doesn't stop whatever the behaviour was and doesn't follow your instructions, you need to follow through with the consequences of taking away that cutlery and replacing them with something safer so that they can still eat, but they have taken that risk and that safety issue away. The other thing to be mindful of is, why is a child misbehaving at meal times? What's the underlying reason here? There is the potential that there might be something else going on. They might be a bit tired, they might be upset about something. It could be something that has absolutely nothing to do with the meal itself, and it's just coming out at that point in time. So if you are dealing with some of these things where you think it's not so much about the food, but more about these external factors, you might want to have a think of how you can manage that. So for example, if the child is tired, if there's any way of adjusting meal times or considering providing more food when the child is most alert and interested in the day, that could be really helpful. For example, if the family even say to you, I'm having trouble getting little Johnny to eat food of an evening, how's it going at daycare? Is he eating well? And he eats well at lunch. Even offering that as a solution to the parents and saying, this might be an opportunity to have the main meal of the day here with us at the centre when he's really alert, so that you don't have to stress so much in the evenings. You can just give him a smaller meal, a snacky meal, and not worry that he hasn't had enough for the whole day. It's possible that the child might not be hungry as well. So thinking about what other things they've had with you and before they got to you, and also what kind of things they're drinking. I don't want them filling up on formula or juice, etc. Toddlers should be offered food sort of every 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours, but really we only want in between that them to be drinking water only so that they're not filling up by mistake. The child might also be bored or restless, so it might be useful to provide some sort of distraction here of entertainment or stimulation for them during the meal. This could just be as simple as having a conversation while you're eating, talking about what you're going to do after the meal, what they've done earlier in the day, reading a book to them, getting a toy to join them to eat together with, like a stuffed toy or something like that, just as some sort of way of distracting from the meal and keeping them entertained. And of course, the other option is that the child might not be feeling unwell, or potentially things like teething could be interfering as well. So giving them a once over and checking things like their temperature, for any other signs of discomfort. If it is something like teething, offering them soothing drinks and foods, something cold and easy for them to consume might help deal with that issue.
Yeah, those are some really great pointers. And I think I loved your point about telling kids, I guess, what they can do rather than what they shouldn't do. So oftentimes, we're really tempted to say, don't do that, put that down. But without giving direction about what a child should be doing, they can sometimes be a little bit lost in terms of like, oh, okay, if I'm not allowed to play with my, fork, what am I meant to do? We've got to remember that their little brains are still learning and, they might need just a little bit of help to make the right decision. Okay, so if we have, I guess, a situation where our gut's telling us that this is a bit more than probably what I'm able to handle as an educator, or I'm a little bit worried, what should early childhood educators be doing next?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it can be a really tricky thing to deal with for educators. So if you are concerned about a child who's potentially consistently eating very small amounts or eating a very limited range of foods, the first step really is to have a chat to the family and the carers about whether this is happening at home as well as at the childcare centre or in the care setting. And talking about what their normal mealtime meals and foods provided at home look like, just to provide a bit more insight into the child's diet outside of the care setting and potentially identify some familiar behaviours and foods that could be used while the child is in care to make them more comfortable and encourage them to eat. This might be particularly helpful if the child comes from a cultural background maybe that you're not so familiar with. Now, the other side of this is that potentially there's a need to get the family to go speak to a health professional for some input. So the first port of call for this kind of thing could be someone like the local maternal child and family health nurse. Now, to help families find their local nurse, you can direct them to the Find a Health Professional tool on the Go and Grow website, and this will help them navigate down to where their local health nurse is, or potentially help them find an allied health professional that can help with their child's picky eating.
Yeah, excellent. And that actually brings us to the end of this episode. So we hope that you found this discussion useful.
For more episodes alongside many free resources to support your centre and families, visit the Grow and Go Toolbox at growandgotoolbox.com. Check us out on social media on Instagram and Facebook for regular tips on feeding the under fives. We would like to acknowledge the Commonwealth Department of Health and Aged Care for funding the Toolbox and the University of Queensland for supporting this project.
Thank you.